Welcome to Podcast on the Brink, your weekly dose of Indiana basketball news and discussion, brought to you by the Assembly Call and Inside the Hall. I'm your host, Jerod Morris. Join me live at assemblycall.com every Thursday night and immediately following every IU game for our live IU postgame show. And visit InsideTheHall.com for complete coverage of IU basketball and to join the discussion in the Inside the Hall Premium Forum.
Hoosier fans, it's Indiana basketball time. IU Basketball Mini-Series tickets are now available in 6-game or 3-game ticket packages, as well as individual games. This is your chance to check out the Hoosiers inside beautiful Simon Scott Assembly Hall. For more information, call or text 812-855-4006 or visit iuhoosiers.com. Go IU.
On this week's edition of Podcast on the Brink, we've got a little something fun planned for you. We are going to look ahead to the upcoming Big Ten season and do some over-unders. Bart Torvik from barttorvik.com supplied us with over-unders. Alex is here. Our special guest, Andy Bottoms, is here. Of course, the bracketologist for Inside the Hall, my co-host at the Assembly Call. And so we're going to go through these over-unders, say whether we're taking the over or the under or the push. You'll get that joke when you listen. And then also we have a few locks. So we each had to come up with a couple of locks. So we're going to go through that, give kind of our general overview thoughts of Indiana's Big Ten opponents this year, and of course Indiana as well, in this edition of Podcast on the Brink. Before we get to that, a quick word from our sponsor here at Podcast on the Brink, and that is Home Field. So this episode of Podcast on the Brink brought to you by Home Field. And while Home Field is technically a new sponsor of the show, I mean new-ish, we've been doing these ads for them for about 5 weeks now, the team behind Home Field is one that we're very familiar with, that you're probably familiar with from the past few seasons here of Podcast on the Brink, because this past August, the team over at Hoosier Proud, one of our sponsors from last season, took all of their college designs and launched Home Field. And at their website, homefieldapparel.com, you will find the comfiest and most unique officially licensed IU apparel that is available anywhere. Now, Home Field was started by an IU grad, a guy named Connor, and all of Home Field's premium collegiate apparel is designed and printed right out of Indianapolis. And this week, if I might offer my suggestion for what you should check out, I would say go to homefieldapparel.com, check out the IU Champions tee. It features the 5 championship years and a vintage IU basketball design. This is one of the shirts that I have. I really like it, so that would be my suggestion. But there's a bunch of other ones there that you can check out as well, whether you're looking to buy something for yourself or for a gift to get ready for the season. You know, you need some new gear. It's a new season. Get some new gear. And here's the best part. Our friends at Home Field have a special deal for Podcast on the Brink listeners. Use the promo code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K, at checkout, and you will get 15% off of your first order at homefieldapparel.com. That's promo code BRINK for 15% off at homefieldapparel.com. Home Field, wear one for the team. Okay, now here is this week's edition of Podcast on the Brink. I will let you know, Andy was in his car at the beginning, so a couple of the first times he speaks, his audio is a little bit choppy. One time it's kind of real choppy and you can't hear. That goes away. It's only the first couple times. Once he settles in, he was driving. Once he settles in, his audio is fine and comes through clear. So apologies for that. Just try to fight through those couple of times and rest assured that it does get better. Okay, here's this week's episode. Let's do some over-unders. And we are joined this week on Podcast on the Brink by a very special guest. It is Andy Bottoms, my co-host over on the Assembly Call, and of course the bracketologist now for Inside the Hall, one of the world's highest ranked bracketologists at that. Andy, excited to have you here on Podcast on the Brink.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So we're going to do our over-unders this week, our Big Ten over-unders, which is going to be a lot of fun. Before we get to that, though, Andy, you've been doing your preseason bracketology, kind of rolling these out. As of this recording, you've gone all the way up through the 5 seeds, I think, so you have yet to reveal your 1 through 4 seeds, but that will be on InsideTheHall.com Thursday, I believe. But I want to just hit one of your seeds, which is Indiana. You have the Hoosiers as a 6 seed preseason. Why, as you were kind of going through this, why to you did the Hoosiers fall there as a 6 seed?
Well, it was good. It prompted the first tweet that somebody sent, albeit tongue-in-cheek, that asked why I hated Indiana. So we're already off to a good start. No, I think I had them as they were right on the border of a 5 and a 6. I think with a lot of these teams, you can project what they're going to look like based on who they had last year and who's coming back. IU's particularly difficult in that regard just because there are so many new faces. And there's also probably a little bit of I'm a little too close to it in some ways. So if there are ties to be broken, I'm usually going to break them against IU so I don't look like a complete homer, particularly as we get before the season when nobody's actually played any games. But I do think if they finish, they're the third highest seed of any team in the Big Ten that I'll have, and that's kind of where I had slotted them as we've talked about, projecting the league. So it at least lines up with that. But I think, you're going to see a ton of Big Ten teams in that 5 to 8 range. I think there were 4 of them in what I released today, and I think IU will be right there in the middle. I think with some potential mobility, if they do finish, the top couple teams in the league, to maybe move on to one of those protected top 4 seed lines.
Excellent. All right, so let's get in. You just mentioned the Big Ten and how many teams will probably be kind of listed there between 5 and 8. Alex, we want to do some over-unders this week for the Big Ten. And we both thought for this that it wouldn't really be fair if we tried to kind of come up with the numbers to then give our over-under thoughts on. So we called up Bart Torvik, our friend from BartTorvik.com. He's a Wisconsin fan, but he's a good guy. He's been on the show before. And his site, BartTorvik.com, definitely another one in addition to KenPom.com that you should have bookmarked, that you should go to. Has a little bit of a different way of viewing it, different numbers than KenPom, so it's really useful stuff. And he provided us with over-unders for each Big Ten team that we're going to make our picks on. We're going to provide our locks, kind of the ones that we feel the strongest about. Alex, do you have anything that you want to say here before we hop in and just start going through these over-unders?
This is going to be fun. That's the first thing I have to say. I've actually been studying this morning, trying to prepare the best I can. And, the main takeaway is there's just a lot of teams that are grouped kind of in this middle ground that are going to be tough calls. So I'm looking forward to seeing what my hunch is, how my hunch on these teams stacks up with your guys. So should be a fun episode. The ground rules are we're picking 2 locks and no picking the under on Rutgers. So that's it.
Yes. Yeah. So one other note before we start, I went through and looked at the preseason conference record projections at KenPom and at Bart's site just to kind of get an idea. And if you average those together, you've got Michigan State at 13.5 wins. You've got Rutgers at the bottom at 5 wins. And then every other team in the conference from Michigan to Minnesota is between 11.5 and 8 wins, which is crazy. And I don't know how that compares to the preseason. I don't know if, in the preseason, these numbers tend to cluster toward the middle, but it does kind of give you an indication of just how kind of muddled that middle of the Big Ten is, and kind of what people have said, that there are really no great teams in the Big Ten. It's not as top heavy as before, but boy, it really should be competitive once we get into the heart of the Big Ten season, which is part of what makes doing these over-unders kind of challenging and should make this fun. So, Andy, we'll start with you. We're going to go from the bottom and go up. And so, bottom from the projected over-under that Bart gave us. So, Andy, we'll start with you. We'll start with Rutgers, and the over-under that Bart gave us was 4.5. Are you taking over or under 4.5 wins for Rutgers?
I feel like you're obliged or you're obligated to take the under on Rutgers, pretty much no matter what. I don't think I've seen hardly any preseason projections that put them anywhere of the league. Too much. I think that's an under.
All right, Andy, you're breaking up just a little bit there, but just to confirm, you are taking the under on Rutgers, which I think is
yes, that is correct.
Okay, all right, just wanted to get that clear. Alex, what about you? Over under 4.5 for Rutgers?
Under. No, I don't really have much to add. The only thing that was really fun about Rutgers last year was Corey Sanders, and he's not there anymore, so probably won't be watching too much Rutgers basketball, but I'm going with the under.
Yep, I'm going with the under as well, and I don't really think it's something that we need to belabor. So under on Rutgers, but none of us are allowed to use that for our lock. So we continue on. The Northwestern Wildcats are next at 7. Andy, are you going over under 7 wins for Northwestern?
They're an interesting one. I think, certainly the loss of Bryant McIntosh is big. I'm inclined to say under, but I do think they could outperform that just because there's some interesting pieces there with the guys that they have back, but the way they kind of fell off a cliff last year makes it hard to take an optimistic stance on them, so I'll take the under on them as well.
Yeah, I'm going to go. Well, actually, with Northwestern, I went push because I went through and actually tried to project the standings, and I had Northwestern at 7 wins. I don't really feel good about it. Definitely not a lock. I could definitely see it. I would definitely lean more toward under just because of the questions they have at point guard. And, just kind of the turmoil it feels like they have with the struggles from last year, all the new arena stuff. So I'm just not very confident on Northwestern. So I'm going to give that a push. Alex, where are you going with 7 wins for Northwestern?
I'm actually going to take the over slightly.
Whoa.
I think they'll win 8 games. They're, to me, good enough to beat probably most of the bottom of the league at home, and I think they can squeak out a few road wins. So I'll go with the over. I think Ken Palm's got them projected to win 9 Big Ten games, so I don't think it's too crazy to think that they'll win 8.
T-Rank has them projected at 10, so I mean they're that 7 is 2.5 less than the average that those two sites give them. So they'll be an interesting one to watch. All right, staying in that state, let's go with Illinois. Andy, the over-under for Illinois is 7. Where are you going with that one?
They just had so much roster turnover that I think it's I'm just going to take the under on all of them, and I'm not sure who's going to win these games. Actually, I didn't have time to do what you did and actually go through and kind of pick them, but I struggle to believe. Even though I think it's potential that Underwood could bring in guys that are going to be able to buy in a little bit more to what he wants to do. I just don't know with losing the number of players that they lost and how much change there really was there. It feels hard to project them to win more than 7. Although I will say some of these are hard to recalibrate in your mind what the records would actually be with the 20-game schedule. So that made it a little bit tough as well, but I'll take the under on them as well.
Yeah, their kind of average record was 8.5 based on the projections at Ken Palm and T-Rank. I'm going under on Illinois too. I think they're headed in the right direction. I think they've got a good backcourt that'll probably help them spring an upset or two, but they just have so little down low, and I just think it's going to take Brad Underwood a little bit more time. Alex, what do you think about Illinois?
I'm going under too. I mean, they play IU twice, they play Wisconsin twice, they play Nebraska twice, Ohio State and Penn State, all those teams twice. As you said, they have nobody in the front court. I don't think they're going to be all that much better offensively. I think Trent Frazier and the freshman that they have, Io, I don't know how you say his last name, but I know he's
Dosunmu?
Yeah, Dosunmu. Yeah. I think they've got some talent. I don't necessarily think this is like a good season coming up for them because they've had, as Andy said, so much turnover. And I don't necessarily think that this is necessarily the roster that Brad Underwood ultimately wants to have. And so for those reasons, I'm going to take the under.
And you mentioned the schedule there, and the schedule is important. Like, it's really hard to do this exercise, I found, without going and trying to look at, who each team's single plays are, who they don't play on the road. And I think this next one is very illustrative of that. It's Penn State. The over-under is 9. Penn State doesn't have to play at Indiana or at Michigan State. So, those are 2 likely losses that they aren't going to have, thanks to the schedule. Their average at Ken Palm and T-Rank is 10 wins. Andy, what are you doing with Penn State at 9?
Yeah, their schedule is interesting. They do have double plays against Michigan, Purdue, Nebraska, Wisconsin, and Maryland. So not terribly easy there. I guess just to break my streak, I'm going to take the over. I do think, losing Tony Carr is big. But they do have Josh Reeves, Lamar Stevens, Mike Watkins, all there. So I'm somewhat hesitant to put many eggs in the Pat Chambers as a coach basket, but I will. I'll say they might be able to eke out 9 wins. I don't see them, eclipsing that 8 by a whole lot. That seems like a pretty good number for them. But I do think they've got enough veteran pieces. That always seems to be kind of a weird place certainly for IU to play and for some other schools as well. So, maybe they steal a couple of those games at home. And like you said, they miss a couple tough road trips. So I'll give them the benefit of the doubt and say they squeak over that number.
I may have had that incorrect. I think Bart actually had them at 8 instead of 9. So I may have mistyped that. So if it's,
I'm looking at it right now.
So
yes, that does change everything.
He had Penn State, Iowa, and Minnesota all at 8. So
okay, so he had them at 8. So that means I'm taking the over because I had Penn State at 9. I don't feel good about that. But I have them at 9. Lamar Stevens is a good returning player. Josh Reeves is a good defender. So, I mean, they've got that experience. And maybe, with some of the offensive possessions that Tony Carr just ate up, maybe they can spread those around and still, and find some guys who can handle those. But I certainly don't think that they'll be as good without Tony Carr. So I don't feel good about that one, but I am going to take the over, but I'm definitely not locking it in. Alex, what do you think about Penn State?
Yeah, I'll take the over too. I think they have enough to, cause problems for some teams. Josh Reeves is a really good defensive player. I think he can blossom into a better offensive player than we've seen in the past couple of years, just because he's going to have more opportunity. Lamar Stevens, as you mentioned, is a pretty good player. I think a lot maybe will come down to Mike Watkins and what his status is going to be this season. He's had some off-court problems, but it's to me, they're not one of the 4 worst teams, I don't think, in the league. So, I don't feel too bad about this one. I'll definitely take the over.
Hey, I'm going to jump in here real quick for a couple of words about our other sponsor this week, SeatGeek. Getting tickets online can be far too complicated. There are hundreds of sites and varying levels of reliability, so it's hard to know who to trust when you're out there online trying to find tickets. And that's why SeatGeek is the way to go. SeatGeek pulls millions of tickets into one place so you can easily find the seats you want for a price that you're willing to pay. There's nothing quite like being there in person, and SeatGeek will get you closer to the action for a great value. It's quite likely Romeo's only going to be here for 1 year. You're going to want to be able to say that you saw him in person at least once, and when you're trying to figure out whether that's going to be in Bloomington for an IU home game or for one of the road games that Indiana goes to, or later this year in the NCAA tournament, hopefully, fingers crossed, SeatGeek is the place to go to find those tickets, because SeatGeek is designed to make the ticket buying experience easier than ever. They search these ticket sites, they grade every ticket based on value, so it really helps you immediately identify the best seats that fit your budget, and every purchase is fully guaranteed, so you can shop for tickets with confidence. That's why I have the SeatGeek app on my phone, and I use it for sports tickets, concert tickets, pretty much any type of live event. That's the first place I go to see if they have tickets, and they usually do. And best of all, Podcast on the Brink listeners get 20% off of your first SeatGeek purchase. $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase. Download the SeatGeek app, enter the promo code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K, that's promo code BRINK, and you will get $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase. SeatGeek, life's an event, we have the tickets. Now let's continue with our Big Ten over-unders. Okay, next up is Iowa. Bart has Iowa listed as an 8 wins. Andy, are you going over/under 8 wins for Iowa?
Are either of you able to tell me whether they'll be playing any defense this year? I feel like that's going to have a big influence on my answer.
I mean, I'm going to guess no, but they could play better defense than last year and still be playing basically no defense. So,
well, that's fair. I guess I'll take the slight over again. I kind of like Penn State. I wouldn't see them getting any more than 9, but I won't pick a push. I'll at least take the 9. I mean, when you look, you have so many contributors back. I mean, really, Dom Ewell, Brady Ellingson, and I guess Ahmad Wagner are the only guys they lost, and none of those guys average more than 3 points a game. So to me, there's a lot of talent there, but anybody who's followed IU football over the years knows it's easy to talk yourself into, like, oh, we have all these guys back from a team that really didn't do all that well. So I'm not sure what that experience means, but I think with, Cook and Bohannon, and some of those guys, I think there's enough offensive firepower to, trip up a few people. Again, I don't see them finishing above 500 in the league, but I think it's reasonable to assume some level of progress from last year to this.
God, I had a hard time with this one. Bart and KenPom both have them at 10 wins. When I originally did this, I projected them at 10 as well and actually had them as one of my locks. I was like, well, let me just double check on this, because how many did they win last year? They won 4 games last year. So I do think they'll be better. I think there's something to be said for continuity. Obviously this is an offensive era of basketball and they can really score, but I just can't see them making up 6 games. So I ended up editing that and going to 8. So I'm going to push this one because it's right at the 8 line. And I kind of agree with you, Andy. I think they'll be better, but I just can't get my head around them being more than 4 games better until I start seeing a little bit more defense. And it's the same guys. It's not like they have an influx of, new players that we expect to be big defensive stalwarts. So I'm sticking with 8. I'm pushing Iowa. Alex, what do you have for the Hawkeyes?
Actually, I had written down in my notes, I had, 2 sentences is what I had written down. I'll just read them and then we can move on. Are they going to play any defense? ? I actually feel like 8 is a decent number here, but I'm just not convinced they're going to guard anyone. I'll take the under.
Okay. Well, so no one has locked anything yet, right? No locks.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. So we feel stronger about the top half of the Big Ten.
But you have taken two pushes, which I think you've used all yours up.
Well, hey.
Yeah, if you do this next year, we're going to have to revise the ability for him to throw pushes out there.
Hey, hang on.
Yeah,
if you don't want to push, then you add the half point. I mean, what am I supposed to do if I project the rankings? It's a certain number. I'm going to push it. That's a fair choice. I'm standing up for myself on this.
Let's go to who we got? Minnesota.
Minnesota, yes. Okay, on to Minnesota.
You're the one that has to look at yourself in the mirror, so as long as you can do that, it's fine.
Okay, all right, Minnesota. So Richie Pitino, this is a big season for him. The over/under is at 8. I'm not going to tell you what I have because you guys will just make fun of me, so we'll just leave mine without saying. Andy, what do you have over/under on 8 for Minnesota?
It's weird. This is a team that was a complete dumpster fire last year, yet has somehow managed to generate a lot of preseason buzz, like they're being underrated this year. And so it's a little bit strange in that regard. The Eric Curry injury is a factor. He's going to miss some time. They announced recently, and so I think getting him back was going to be a big help in their front court. I'm not necessarily convinced that Isaiah Washington is going to be able to play the point there. And there are some good, Jordan Murphy, Amir Coffey are both really good players. I'm going to take what's this one at 8? I'm going to take it. I'll go slightly under, just because again, it feels like a team that had a lot of turmoil last year. He's a little bit on the hot seat. I think if things start to go poorly, they could come off the rails pretty quickly because they showed that that's the way things went last year.
Yeah, I think Minnesota will be better. It's kind of like Iowa. I think they're going to be better this year because they have some good players. They're getting some guys back from injury, but how much better? I mean, they won 4 games last year. So even if they double that, they're still at 8. So I projected this as 8 wins, so I'm going to stick with the push. And that was the average of their T rank in KenPom was 8 wins as well. Alex, where are you going on Minnesota?
I'm actually going to go over on Minnesota, and I'm probably it's probably going to be like mid-January when I look back at this and think, like, what was I thinking?
Richie does have Richard his dad Pitino to give him advice all year long.
Now, if he's going to come in and maybe coach the defense, Rick Pitino, because he is a great defensive coach, I'll feel good about this. But I think Amir Coffey's pretty important. Like, if he's healthy all year, he could be worth several wins. Jordan Murphy, you pretty much know what you're getting out of him. I don't love this pick, but I'll go. I think they can win 9 Big Ten games, so I'm going to go over on the Gophers.
All right, next up, the Ohio State Buckeyes. The over/under is set at 9.5. Andy, they were the big surprise of the Big Ten last year. No Keita Bates-Diop this year. What are you doing with Ohio State at 9.5?
I'm going to take the over, largely because of Chris Holtmann. They brought in, Keyshawn Woods, a Wake Forest transfer, and CJ Walker. I think they're handing out waivers so much, I forget whether one or both of those guys is actually going to be eligible. But I think I'm just kind of putting eggs in the basket of him being a good coach at this point. And they're actually going to be, I'm going to call them one of my locks, and I'll tell you why.
Whoa.
Not necessarily because I think they're that much better, but I'm going to take the over because they only, of the top 7 teams, I kind of drew a cutoff after Maryland. Maybe that's just because that's the number of Big Ten teams I had in the preseason bracketology. But of those 7, they only play home and homes with 3 of them. While against the bottom 4, at least through the rankings that I have, they play 3 of those home and away. So potentially 6 wins if they really are the worst teams in the league, plus another one of them, a single play at home. So you might get to 7 if they take care of business in those. So, I'm going to go with that. I think it's putting a lot of faith in Chris Holtmann, which has proven over the course of time to be a pretty good thing to do. But there are definitely some new pieces, and certainly losing, guys like Keita Bates-Diop and Jayshawn Tate will not be easy. But I'll make them one of my locks. I actually have 3. This is the one that I'm least confident in, but I'll throw it out there.
T-Rank and KenPom both have them at 10 wins. I'm going with the over. I projected them at 10 as well for a lot of the same reasons that you stated, Andy. they have a lot of solid players, no great player. And so I think that prevents them from being able to move up and being a 12, 13, or 14 win team. But I like them. I trust Chris Holtmann, so I think that they'll settle in right around 500. Alex, what do you say for Ohio State?
I'm going over also. I like you guys think that, Chris Holtmann is the real deal as a coach. I think he's really got it rolling there in terms of future classes with recruiting. They're going to have a team to be reckoned with, I feel like, in the league. But we're talking about this year specifically. I like C.J. Jackson as a senior, who's going to give them a nice presence of point guard. Wesson inside, I think is a difficult matchup for plenty of the lower tier Big Ten teams. Just won't have an answer for him. So you throw those all together, and I think Ohio State wins at least 10 Big Ten games.
Next up is Maryland. The over-under is set at 10.5. Andy, what are you doing with Maryland? You might be muted, Andy.
I definitely am.
Yeah.
I struggle. I struggle with them because they appear to have they lost a lot, but they still got in Callan and Bruno Fernando, Gerald Morcell. They've got some good players. They had a relatively highly thought of recruiting class, but I can't get away from thinking back to a few years ago when everybody said they have all these pieces, they're going to be really good, and they really underperformed. So you can lay that at the feet of Mark Turgeon if you want, but I think that I have them under. I think they're probably a 500 team in the league, and they were one of the last teams that I had in. I think while some people seem pretty high on them, I'm a little mixed, and so they don't have as many games against the bottom four of the league. They have single plays against Rutgers, Illinois, and Northwestern, which kind of just the opportunity to bank wins against teams like that becomes a little bit difficult. Versus they've got home and homes against four of the top six. So I think schedule wise doesn't help them, and not necessarily going to stick my neck out for Mark Turgeon as the coach.
Andy, you keep taking all the good points. We're going to have to make you go third here on a couple of these. I'm going.
Hey, you're in charge. Do what you got to do.
I'm going slight over on Maryland. I would not be shocked if you told me Maryland won 13 games or that they won 7. I think they have a lot of variance because they do have a lot of talent, but we've seen this program be one that kind of underperforms. So I'm just kind of splitting the difference, but I do think they'll win 11 games. So I'm going to take the slight over on this one. Not enough to lock it, but a slight over. Alex, what do you think about Maryland?
I'm going under, and this is another one that's my notes are pretty fun to read here. I said, is Mark Turgeon still their coach? Question mark. And the answer was yes, and so I'm taking the under. I just don't think that much of Mark Turgeon. I just don't think of
like
that
a
much of
decision tree
him.
where
Yeah, I mean it's like they have good players, but I don't have any confidence that he's going to maximize the talent. I mean, you look back at the really good teams, at least on paper that he had. I don't think he got past the Sweet 16. And so, I think if they had Kevin Huerter back, I'd feel better, but I don't, I think Anthony Cowan's a really good player. I think he's one of the more underrated guards in the Big Ten, but yeah, I've got to take the under. And also the other thing with Maryland is they've kind of been mentioned some of this FBI stuff kind of on the fringe of it. And so I'm really interested to see if that affects anything as the season goes on. Does the heat get turned up on Turgeon if they lose some games early? So I'm going under.
All right, next up is Purdue. The over-under is set at 11. Alex, why don't you hit lead off on the Boilermakers?
I'm going over on Purdue. I think they're probably right around 12 Big Ten wins, solidly in the NCAA tournament. Nothing spectacular. Carson Edwards, while I don't necessarily agree that he's for sure going to be the Big Ten Player of the Year, I think he's got a really good chance to do that. I do have questions about the supporting cast. I'm not necessarily sold on the big leap as a sophomore for Nojel Eastern, but I think Edwards is going to do enough to have them win 12 Big Ten games. So I'll take the over. Yeah,
I'm taking the over on Purdue too. A really good guard can take you a long way in the Big Ten, especially a Big Ten like this where the margins are pretty thin. So I think they have enough question marks that they won't be able to compete for the title this year, but I think they'll be, solidly the top half of the Big Ten team. So I'm going over on Purdue. Andy, your thoughts on the Boilers?
I will go over slightly, but I will say one watch out here is the schedule. They only play Iowa, Northwestern, Illinois, and Rutgers once apiece.
Wow.
So again, when you kind of think about how are you going to get to these win totals, a lot of times you're padding that number by beating at least those who are projected to be among the worst in the league. And so their single plays against Michigan and Wisconsin are both on the road. So schedule doesn't do them any favors, but I'll still take the slight over.
All right, next up we have the Wisconsin Badgers. The over-under is set at 11.5. Alex, what are you doing with the Badgers?
Well, since they're one of my teams that I think has a chance to win the Big Ten, I'm going to go over here as well, slightly. I think there's a lot to like here, although I'm still not completely sold that Greg Gard is the answer. He's only done it before really with Bo Ryan's players. So this is kind of his put up or shut up year for me. But I think with Ethan Happ and having their backcourt healthy, the Badgers are in for a rebound year. I will take the over. But I don't feel great about it. So I'll take them at 12 wins.
Yeah, I'm going over on Wisconsin too. They don't play at Michigan State or Purdue. They also have single plays against Indiana and Nebraska, and I think you hit it. I mean, they've got a great player in Ethan Happ, as much as it pains me to say that. And they've got, guys back from injury. They've got a good supporting cast. So I'm going over, and this is one of my locks. I think this is a team that can get to 13, 14 wins because of kind of the, some of the experienced pieces that they have and based on the schedule. So I hope I'm wrong on this, but I'm going over on Wisconsin and locking it. Andy?
Well, as listeners of our show know, this will make me physically ill, but I will also take the over and lock it because
we cannot tell Ryan about this. Me,
no, he probably won't listen to this. I'm not too concerned. But if you look schedule-wise, they only play Michigan of the top. If you assume the top 5 teams are some combination of Michigan State, Michigan, Indiana, Purdue, and Nebraska, they play 4 of them only once. With Michigan, the one that they play both times, and they've got home and homes with Iowa, Penn State, Northwestern, Illinois, and then a home game with Rutgers. I mean, that's 9 games. I mean, you wouldn't be shocked to see them win 7, maybe even 8 of those. And if you do that, then you don't have very much further to go. So I think the schedule does them a lot of favors. I do think, they certainly have a lot of guys back. Again, we can argue whether having a lot of guys back from a team that didn't perform all that well is a good thing or not, but they did show some signs down the stretch and really played better toward the end of the season. It was just too little too late at that point. So I'll make that my second of my 3 locks, but that's the one I feel more confident with than the Ohio State one from earlier.
Consider this the best argument we've made for playing a true round robin schedule in the Big Ten. Next up, the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Alex, the over under is set at 13, which is the number of wins that they had last year. What are you doing with Nebraska?
I'm going to go under, and I'm going to lock it in. Sorry, Tim Miles. I think your jokes are funny at Big Ten Media Day, but your schedule is not what it was last year. You're going to have a chance to actually beat some teams that are tournament worthy. And, while I think Nebraska is going to be a tournament team, I think they could win 11 or 12 Big Ten games and I didn't consider pushing any of these. So, that for me to make a pick, I would have had to say 14 Big Ten wins, which I just can't get there with Nebraska. So I'll take the under, and I'm locking it.
Yeah, I'm going under on Nebraska too. For what it's worth, they're projected for 10 wins at both T-Rank and KenPom. I'm going under. I project them at about 11. But yeah, I'm going under. I'm locking it. A lot of the same reasons you said, Alex. Andy, what are you doing?
Make it 3. That was the other lock that I had. I think, while those 4 guys that they have coming back in Palmer, Copeland, Watson, and Roby are really good, when you look down the rest of the roster, they lost some of the role players they had last year, and it really becomes difficult to see, who they can rely on outside of those 4 guys. And it's great to have that 4. But as you said, when you look back at the schedule last year, they beat one team that made or was really even in the conversation for the NCAA tournament. That was beating Michigan at home. So everybody can say, oh, they got 13 Big Ten wins, but those largely came against teams that weren't really in contention. And anytime they had a chance to play somebody who did make the tournament, they didn't win. So maybe they get better with a year of experience, but to project them for, 13 or 14 wins out of a 20-game schedule seems like a stretch to me. Their single, some of their single plays, they play at Michigan, at IU. They only play Wisconsin once, but, they only play 1 game against Rutgers and 1 against Northwestern. So that doesn't do them any favors either, but I'm not as high on them as some other people seem to be, for sure.
All righty, we've got the top 3 left. Here we go. We'll start with Indiana. The over-under is set at 13. Alex, what are you doing with the Hoosiers at 13 wins?
This won't make me popular, but I'm going under.
Why do you hate this year's Indiana team, Alex?
No, I don't hate this team. I actually had them at 13, but I'm not doing any pushes, so I'm going to go under. I don't feel great about it either way. I think if everything breaks right, they could win 14 or 15 games and contend for the Big Ten title. But, if it doesn't, I could see him at 11 or 12. And so, maybe it's the pessimist from the last couple of years in me, but I'm going to go, I think they'll win 12 Big Ten games, so I'm taking the under.
I'm going over. I project them at about 14 wins. For what it's worth, T-Rank and Ken Palm have Indiana both projected for 11. I think when you have a duo like Juwan Morgan and Romeo Langford, you're going to have the best duo most nights out in Big Ten play, and a lot of nights you're going to have the two best players on the court. And I think that goes a long way in a conference with a lot of teams kind of clustered in the middle. And I think a lot of nights that will be the difference. And I tend to think that some of the more glaring questions will be answered positively. I think Indiana will get better point guard play. I think a guy like Justin Smith will step up and be a third scorer. And I like the depth. And I think especially in a 20-game Big Ten schedule, when you have a lot of depth of good players, I think that's really going to help. So I think Indiana has a lot of question marks, but I think a lot of the other teams in the Big Ten have just as many, if not more. And again, I'm kind of breaking the tie with the fact that Indiana has Juwan and Romeo, and that's as good of a duo as you'll find in the conference. Andy, what do you think about Indiana?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of like Alex. I didn't have any of these flagged as a push, although if there was one that would be close enough to do it, this is probably the one because that 13 number feels about right. Outside of the personnel from a schedule standpoint, they do play home and homes with Michigan State, Michigan, and Purdue. But they only play Nebraska and Wisconsin once, and those are at home. Ohio State, same way, they're only at home. So if you look at kind of the middle of the league, those are a lot of where IU single place falls. And if you think that those teams aren't going to be quite that good, then you feel like from a schedule perspective, they have a little bit of an advantage. I'm going to take I guess I'll take the slight, I guess I'll lean over. Why not? But I think, if there was one that I was going to take as a push, this would probably be it. I think 13 feels about right.
All right, next up, the Michigan Wolverines. The over-under is set at 13.5. Andy, what are you going to do with Michigan?
I guess, I tend to think they're going to be in that 13-14 range, so this one is a good one as well. Schedule-wise, they only play Illinois and Rutgers once, which I think, hurts them a little bit. But a lot of their, single plays come at home against the better teams in the league. So Purdue, Nebraska, and Ohio State, they only play once. Those are all at home. So, I guess I'll take the over just slightly and say they get to 14-6. They're who I have second in the Big Ten right now. So I guess if I'm going to project IU to get 14, I probably should do the same for Michigan. So I think that one's pretty close as well, but I'll give them the benefit of the doubt just based in large part to some of the games they've got at home that might be, swing games in terms of being able to get over that number.
Yeah, I just flip Indiana and Michigan. So I'm taking the slight under here. I think Michigan will get 13 wins. I think, they're good, but they've obviously got some transitions to make from last year and some guys who are really stepping into some new roles. And if it weren't for the trust I have in John Beilein, I would probably have them a little bit lower, but he's kind of, almost, stepped into that kind of Bo Ryan mold where you just kind of give him the benefit of the doubt preseason until he proves you otherwise. And right now, he's proving that he can really kind of take a team, mold them, and get them playing better by the end of the year. So I think they're going to be really good, but not good enough to get up into the kind of 14, 15, 16 range. Alex, what do you think about Michigan?
Yeah, I picked them to win the league in the preseason with my on the ballot that I did for the unofficial poll. So I'm going to have to go over because I don't think 13 wins is going to win the league. And so I don't feel great about this one either after I looked at the schedule, but I do think they're going to have enough to win 14 Big Ten games. So I'll take the slide over on the Wolverines.
All right. And the last one, the Michigan State Spartans. The over-under here is set at 15.5. For what it's worth, their average amount of wins at T-Rank and Ken Palm is 13.5. So, kind of see what that means. But Alex, what are you doing with the Spartans at 15.5?
I'm taking this one as my second lock. I'm taking it as an under a lock. We've talked about this, Jerod, all off season. I think Michigan State has a lot of good players, but I think people are putting too much into Izzo and his ability as a coach. He's obviously one of the best to ever do it, but when you lose Jaren Jackson, who's one of the best rim protectors in the country, and you lose a dynamic player like Miles Bridges, and you don't really have, Cassius Winston's a great playmaker, but I don't necessarily think that Josh Langford and Nick Ward are going to create much for others. And so, I think Michigan State's definitely a threat to win the league, but to go over on this, I would have had to project that they're going to win 16 Big Ten games. I just don't see that happening in a year where I think there's going to be a ton of parity in the Big Ten. So I'm taking the under and making it a lock.
Yeah, I'm going under. It's a slight under here. And my opinion on them is probably changing more than any other. They've kind of been my default pick to win the conference just because, I don't see another great team there, but I'm losing confidence on it. Kind of the more, that I look at it, the more I kind of study the lineups, and I'm feeling like you, Alex. Like I think there's a chance maybe without Jackson and Bridges, guys can settle in, to more defined roles this year. But that's all well and good, but you just lost 2 lottery picks, and at the end of the day, that kind of talent and the rim protection that Jerod Jackson brought, that was their biggest strength last year, and now they're not going to have that. So I'm really starting to question my pick of them winning the conference. I'm not changing it, but I'm definitely taking the under on 15.5 wins. Andy, what are your thoughts on the Spartans?
Yeah, I'm going to take the under on them as well. I just think, like Alex said, when you have to start thinking, is this really a team that could go 16-4 in the league? That feels like a stretch, especially because I didn't really feel like anybody else would, had IU and Michigan both in that 14 range. Like, I don't see somebody winning the league by multiple games this year. I just think things are too balanced. And again, you look at the schedule, they have single games against Penn State, Northwestern, Illinois. So they, 3 of the bottom 4 teams, according to some of the projections I've seen, they only play once. So there's not a lot of gimme wins in there. And they've got, double plays with Michigan, IU, Purdue, Nebraska, and their only game against Wisconsin's on the road. So I'll take the under. I think they could get to 15. I think they could win the league, but I just don't think it's not going to be a situation like last year where any 1 or 2 teams really separate themselves from the pack.
All right, Andy, I know you have to go soon, so let's just do a quick recap. Who were your locks again? Who are the teams that you're locking in?
I had the 3 that I had were Ohio State over, Wisconsin over, and Nebraska under.
Okay, and I had Wisconsin as an over and Nebraska as an under. Those are my 2 locks. And Alex, your locks were?
Mine were Nebraska under 13 and Michigan State under 15.5. So
gotcha.
That's where we stood.
All right. Well, this was fun. You listening, definitely give us your picks. Send us tweets at Inside the Hall, at Assembly Call, at Andy Bottoms. Or put them in the comments of the show notes. Let us know what your picks are, especially your locks. Andy, before we let you go, just any final thoughts as you get ready to release your top 4 seeds on the bracketology, or any final thoughts on the Big Ten before we wrap up?
I think it's going to be a really interesting Big Ten season. It was one of the harder leagues to really project as I was going through the process to pick teams for the preseason bracket. So I do think is going to be kind of a jumbled mess in the middle of the league, as these, so many of these numbers being close to one another would suggest. But I think it's going to make it exciting. You're not going to have a dominant team where, Michigan State and Purdue last year really separated themselves. I don't think you're going to have that this year, which to me makes it all that much more exciting. And from an IU perspective, for a team that has a pretty wide range of outcomes, like most would say, I think a kind of jumbled and balanced league is one that plays to their benefit. If everything, if things really come together quickly, that they could have a chance to shake themselves out at the top of that. And we'll find out starting on Thursday night when we can begin to overreact to an exhibition game.
That's right. Yeah, it's not a great sign for the Big Ten's chances to break their championship drought this year, but it certainly should make for a really, really compelling and fun and competitive Big Ten season. Alex, any final thoughts before we wrap?
Just glad that we're going to actually have basketball to discuss on next week's show. This is obviously a blast this offseason to talk about all the hope and everyone's excitement for the season. But as Andy said, we're actually going to have basketball coming up tomorrow night in Simon Scott Assembly Hall. Even if it doesn't count, and even if we're not going to learn much from Chicago State, the real games will be getting here before we know it, and excited to start another season.
Absolutely. So we'll have post-game shows at the Assembly Call after both of those. And then Alex, I'm assuming we'll probably take next week's show to react to what we see in the exhibition game and against Chicago State. And,
yes,
try and figure out what that we learn from these games we can really take forward that is meaningful. But yeah, thank you for joining us on this edition of Podcast on the Brink. Andy, thank you for taking the time to hang out with us as well. And we look forward to watching these games coming up, and we will talk to you next week on another brand new edition of Podcast on the Brink. Thank you for listening to this episode of Podcast on the Brink. We always appreciate you being here. Remember to join me and my co-hosts for more IU basketball talk at assemblycall.com, and visit Alex over at insidethehall.com for complete coverage of Indiana basketball. If you want to support Podcast on the Brink, here is the single best way to do it. Tell anyone you know who loves IU hoops about us and suggest that they subscribe. Podcast on the Brink can be found on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else podcasts are available. Tell your social media followers, email your friends, text your family members. For weekly discussion about IU basketball, they need to be subscribed to Podcast on the Brink. We'll talk to you next time. Go Hoosiers.